interestingly, Franklin Roosevelt, despite all of the concerns of being a wartime president, and there were still obviously huge economic problems in the country, was very focused on the actual details of the development of it. And this is something you've probably seen before, but this is a sketch that Roosevelt did of what his residential lodge would look like and how the layout was. And he gave very specific instructions about where certain people would sleep. It's interesting, one of his early instructions talked about his personal service staff were a group of Filipinos. And he said he wanted to have a special building built for the Filipinos, but the Secret Service people could sleep in tents. So I thought that was kind of interesting of what he thought of his Secret Service detail. Another interesting thing about the operation of Shangri-La, or Camp High-Catoctin, as a presidential retreat, because it was a substitute for the Potomac, which was a naval vessel, the Navy became the command there, both the security and the command. So the presidential retreat was guarded by sailors and Marines, and that's a tradition that is carried on today. Roosevelt called the retreat Shangri-La, and that's from James Hilton's Lost Horizon. And he began using it in the summer of 1942. Roosevelt, I think, used it to put it to good use. I mean, one of the things, he was seeking a place where he could get some rest and relaxation away from all of the concerns of war. But it also was a place that he could meet privately with some of his military planners, and also with some international leaders. And I think the most famous visitor to Shangri-La was Winston Churchill. He came there with Roosevelt in mid-May of 1943. One of the sort of anecdotal stories that goes along with Churchill and Roosevelt going there was, as they were driving through the city of Frederick, Churchill saw a sign for the Barbara Fritchie House, and at that time it was operating as a historic site. And some of the people in the car said a few lines from the poem, and apparently the story is that Churchill, from memory, recited the entire poem. And he reflected, he said, "I got full marks from my highly select American audience, none of whom corrected my many misquotations." But he said it was a poem that he had not even thought about since childhood, but apparently was able to make that recollection. While Churchill was there with Roosevelt, they did really hatched a lot of the plans that became the overall strategy for the invasion of Europe. So some very important things that were taking on there, and they actually even at that point began some discussion about what the world was going to look like after the war. So I think they were rather confident that they would be successful. Roosevelt, one of the other stories, some of you were talking earlier about the cozy. Reportedly at one point Churchill slipped off and went down to the cozy and had a beer down there, and he gave the waitress some coins for the jukebox. So he was not above slipping out for that. But Roosevelt, as I said, really used the retreat as a place to entertain and relax. One of the reflections that I've always been amused by is Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas described his experience here as a guest of FDR. He said, "I had a rather lonely time at Shangri-La because FDR was holed up doing homework on endless problems. He would read, then doze, then dictate, then read, then doze. I was company in waiting, ready to mix his favorite cocktail or to join him in idle chit-chat." So I think Roosevelt did put it to good use. During 1942 and 43, he did visit Camp David over 40 times. And in addition to the important meetings that he had with Churchill and his military advisors, it was while he was at Camp David that he learned of that the U.S. troops had invaded North Africa. And it's also there that he learned that Mussolini had resigned his dictatorship in Italy in 1943. One of the interesting things, too, it was a very well-kept secret, I think, even among people here in Thurmont, unless they were directly involved with providing some service. It was a bit of a mystery as to exactly what was going on up there. They knew there was something to do with important people because you'd see these motorcades coming through. But it was a very well-kept secret. And one of the things that Roosevelt was very concerned about were airstrikes. There was a vulnerability that he felt up on the mountaintop there against an airstrike if someone knew that he was there. So really, it was Franklin Roosevelt who brought Camp David to Frederick County with the establishment of Camp David here. Remember, this is during World War II, and Roosevelt's usual retreat had been the USS Potomac. This was the presidential yacht that they were using, but there became a lot of concern about German U-boat activity and just the president's general safety out there. So they began looking for an alternative retreat to the Potomac. And there were several requirements. One of the things, Roosevelt wanted to be at some elevation so that there would be some relief from the summer heat that obviously if you've ever been in DC during the summertime, you know what I'm talking about. But also wanted something that was within a 100-mile radius of Washington, D.C. He first looked at Sugarloaf Mountain. And if you know where that is, down on the Montgomery County, Frederick County border, it's pretty much the most prominent thing on the landscape down there. But it was owned privately by Gordon Strong. And Gordon Strong didn't want it to be something that was exclusively for the use of the president. He wanted it to be something that everyone could enjoy. So he made it rather difficult for Roosevelt to pursue that as his presidential retreat, causing Roosevelt to say, "I don't want it, it belongs to a dirty rat." So they went on looking for other locations. And one of them that they identified was Camp High Catoctin, which is located just right up here in the Catoctin. It's called the Catoctin Recreational Demonstration Area. So I want to talk a little bit about how Shangri-La came about. How, why was this Camp High Catoctin there in the first place? Well, part of it is attributable to the fact that the primary industry in this area was the Catoctin Furnace, which of course is just located a few miles to the south of us. During its early year, really for the first century of its operation, began in the 1770s, it was fired by charcoal. And to produce charcoal, or it was fired by charcoal, you have to cut down a lot of trees. And virtually everywhere that you could see in this area, all throughout the mountainside, was clear cut to produce the massive amount of charcoal that was required to fuel this furnace. Even after the furnace converted to coal, I think it was in the 1880s, you still saw a lot of clear cutting for timber, and so you had a very unhealthy environment that was going on there. That was aggravated by some inadvisable agricultural practices as well. And in the 1920s, the government became more aware of I guess you would call responsible agricultural practices, and they began to look at the idea of taking some of these places like Catoctin Mountain and doing some conservation work and converting them for recreational use. So that was an idea that was hatched in the 1920s, but it wasn't until the New Deal programs of the 1930s that really came to fruition. And the federal government purchased about 10,000 acres, just under 10,000 acres in the Catoctin Mountains for a New Deal program. The idea was to convert what they said was submarginal land into quality outdoor recreation facilities. So they purchased the land in 1935 and developed what was called the Catoctin Recreational Demonstration Area. Now there were two different agencies, two of the New Deal agencies that were involved in the development of this recreational area. And the first was the Works Progress Administration. And they were involved primarily with building facilities, doing roads, bridges, and the buildings that would be parts of the camp. And what you see here is what's called they call it the Blue Blazes Contact Station. And this is actually what's now currently serves as the Park Visitor Center there on Camp Central. You also had the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. They were concerned primarily with this environmental conservation activity. So they were replanting trees and doing things to stop erosion and other things that would create a more healthy environment in that area. So the work began in 1936, and they completed the primary facilities of the camp. And the things we recognize today are Camp Misty Mount, which was completed in 1937, Camp Greentop in 1938, and Camp High Catoctin. And it was, so Camp High Catoctin had been around for about 3 years when it was recognized by Roosevelt.